Build professional skills this semester with Adobe Creative Cloud and create standout work both in and out of the classroom. Save big on professional creativity tools. Students get 65% off Adobe Creative Cloud, including Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, Acrobat Pro, and 20+ creative apps. No matter what project you're working on, Adobe Creative Cloud apps can help you take it to the next level. Visit adobe.com/student to learn more.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Well, a few years ago, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, we were hearing a great deal about mobile phones potentially causing cancer or all sorts of ill health effects. And it seemed to reason, right? I mean, you're holding these electronic devices up to your brain all day long. They're transmitting all sorts of radiation and all sorts of other stuff, who knows what. And it would seem to reason that this could have some sort of effect on your health. Whether that includes cancer or tumors, I have no idea. But then that kind of went away. We saw a couple of studies that showed mobile phones didn't have any sort of effect on cancer or really any health effects to speak of. Then a few things happened over the course of the last few years. One, there's been increasing opposition from certain communities about placement of 5G towers. A lot of folks are saying, wait a minute. We don't know enough about what these towers do and the radiation that's included in them to have it placed in a residential neighborhood. We're not sure what this is going to do to our health. Another thing that's happened is we have seen a dramatic uptick in the number of young people getting cancer. And some of that might be able to be explained through junk food or alcohol consumption or a sedentary lifestyle or who knows what else. But I was among those that said, could it have anything to do with the fact that young people have spent the last 2 decades with a mobile phone on their person, using it essentially every waking hour? Then, last year, the French actually banned the sale of the iPhone 12 due to its high electromagnetic radiation levels. They subsequently lifted that ban after a software update, but it has a lot of folks wondering, is there actually something here? Recently, there was a study that came out that said, no, nothing to look at here. Mobile phones are fine. Keep using them. Someone who has perhaps a different view is one of the greatest experts and really one of the world's leading authorities on electromagnetic radiation. He's a scientist with expertise in physics, engineering, and the health sciences. So he can speak to this from 3 different perspectives. He's a professor of toxicology and health effects of electromagnetism, vice chair of the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Radiation, also happens to be a member of the New Hampshire Commission on the Health Impacts of 5G. Who better to turn to than Dr. Paul Heroux? Dr. Heroux, it's great to talk to you. I've been an admirer of your work for a long time.
Thank you, Frank.
Let's begin at the beginning. These smartphones that so many of us are carrying around all day long and seemingly glued to, is there reason to think that they could be dangerous, have some sort of ill effect on our health?
The industry has proposed to the public that these devices were inoffensive because they used what is called non-ionizing radiation. What this means is that the energy emitted by these phones has basically too little energy to ionize molecules, which means it cannot separate electrons from molecules in your body. And they use this argument plus the fact that the radiation was weak, in other words, not as strong as what you have in a microwave oven. These 2 arguments were used to make the people believe, as well as the governing bodies of governments all over the world, that this radiation was safe. Unfortunately, these 2 principles are red herrings. In other words, they are based on wrong physics. So all of the, I would say, safety assessments that have been made throughout the world in most countries, especially in Western countries, have resulted in very high levels for safe exposures, they were called, because physics was incorrectly understood. And the point is that the physics was deliberately misunderstood in order to attain these very high standards of exposure.
So when you say it was deliberately misunderstood by whom? The telecommunications industry?
Basically, it is a variety of committees, some of them national committees in the United States who were leading the field at the time, as well as the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, who had a very, very vested interest in keeping these standards very, very high. And so they had to investigate the health impacts of this radiation as they deployed these systems. But they used physics that dates to 1889 to make their assessment, and they ignored all the advances that have been made since then. And these advances would have led them inevitably to the conclusion that this radiation had to be taken into account in terms of its health effects, because it is not inoffensive. And this rests on very, very firm principles. It rests on Maxwell's equations. It rests on the second principle of thermodynamics. And it rests on what has been discovered over many Nobel Prizes about circulating currents in living systems. So these principles are unassailable. And what I am saying is that industry should have known this at the time that they devised these standards, and they decided to ignore them.
So it sounds like your answer to my question is, in terms of whether or not there's a likelihood of dangerousness from continued use of these smartphones, it sounds like the answer to my question is maybe or probably.
I would say that biological effects that are very, very easily measurable are absolutely inevitable. What can still be discussed is the level to which human beings are affected in their health by this radiation. But frankly, I am quite current about contemporary developments on this subject. And it's very, very worrying, because all of these diseases, in particular chronic diseases that we are afflicted by in present societies, are likely influenced by the increase of radiation in our environment. Basically, this radiation is what we call non-natural radiation, in the sense that it's never present in our environment before technological developments. In other words, your body has become resistant over billions of years to radiation from the sun and to the static field of the earth. But the newly propagating radio frequencies and microwave frequencies are entirely new, and biological systems are not prepared to handle them.
At 30 minutes after the hour, if you're just tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dr. Paul Heroux. Let me ask you about the other issue that I alluded to that people have some concern about, which is the rise of these 5G towers. It sounds like if what you're saying is true about mobile phones and radiation, it sounds like there's a good reason for people to be concerned about 5G towers placed in their neighborhood. Is that right?
Absolutely right. The problem is that industry is extraordinarily enthusiastic about increasing communications levels, and specifically about increasing telecommunications capabilities using wireless. And wireless is not inoffensive. And it is obvious that any health risks that are present with wireless are of no concern, for example, to the military. To achieve what is called electromagnetic spectrum dominance. The U.S. military, for example, always wants more data transmission capability because this is how you can coordinate military units in a field of battle. But contemporary society, the cities of the world right now are not in a field of battle. So these developments that are useful and wanted by the military are in fact inappropriate in terms of the exposure of civilian populations. And unfortunately, it seems that military ideas are being implemented through the enthusiasm of industry in everyday environments. This is totally inappropriate.
Wow, that certainly seems somewhat concerning. Now, some folks may accept what you're saying about the evidence for the safety of radiation and smartphones being overstated or sort of twisted by the telecommunications company. But can you point to specific peer-reviewed studies that you believe have been underappreciated or ignored by the mainstream media or even mainstream scientists regarding the dangers of electromagnetic radiation?
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
This episode is brought to you by Factor. Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code listen50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50. Code listen50. Terms and conditions apply.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Oh, absolutely. There are eminent scientists like Dr. Henry Lai of the University of Washington, Professor Emeritus, that has been compiling the literature for decades. And basically what we find from the scientific literature is that it is perfectly obvious that both for the emissions of power lines and for the wireless emissions, the scientific literature is very, very clear that the effects that are theoretically expected by physics are completely represented in biological research. What is happening is that the research is being misrepresented by an industry that has a very, very strong voice. Why? Because it has extreme, I would say, influence in view of it, the numbers, I mean, the IEEE has almost 500,000 members, and those are specialists in electromagnetic radiation, and they more or less all sing the same tune. Don't worry, buy more of our stuff, and do not worry about health effects. But in terms of science, if you look at it objectively, this is a falsehood. And industry has been very, very active in infiltrating international committees that dare to sound the alarm in relation to this radiation, in particular the International Agency for Research on Cancer in Lyon, France. So there is a continuous, I would say, political battle between science and the interests of industry in relation to this subject. And our role at ICB-EMF is to bring some sort of balance to this situation. We don't claim that we should forbid this non-natural electromagnetic radiation, but we require that it be tamed so that you can have the advantages that come with it, but not pay a price in terms of cancer.
Makes sense.
In terms of diabetes, in terms of heart disease, and so on.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. This is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dr. Paul Heroux. Is there a threshold, based on what you just said, is there a threshold level of EMR exposure that you believe is safe? Or do you advocate, and does the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Radiation advocate, do you advocate basically limiting all exposure to EMR? Is all exposure potentially harmful regardless of the level?
What you have to consider is that there are many different frequencies to consider, and there are many diseases to consider. So some diseases will become apparent in populations, in statistics, in epidemiology at certain levels, while other diseases will appear at different levels. And so, unfortunately, industry in general has suppressed research, especially in North America and in Western Europe generally, about this subject. So essentially, we have a trickle of information on the levels that should be adopted, but we can gain inspiration from the independent research that has been done in the former Soviet Union as well as in China. In other words, they are much more transparent about the effects of electromagnetic radiation than we are here. So, oddly enough, America in particular needs to learn from foreign powers on how to limit risks to itself.
I alluded to the report of the rise in cancer among young people, early onset cancer, people that are younger than the age of 50. You mentioned cancer a minute ago. Do we know enough, and do you know enough, to tie the uptick in radiation that we're all exposed to the uptick in cancer that young people are experiencing?
Okay, you know that in public health, which is based on epidemiology, it's always very difficult to come to conclusions that are accepted by all. Essentially, epidemiology is a large committee of different views with ultimately some risk being accepted almost unanimously. For example, the risk of smoking cigarettes, the risk of being exposed to lead, the risk of being exposed to pollution in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But there is always a very, very rich discussion around these things. But in fact, if I consider the advice of the people who know about these subjects because they have researched it, which in North America is relatively few people, these specialists at ICB-EMF are very, very convinced that we need better protection for the public now. And as we enrich our environment with even more frequencies, it will become more and more apparent, even acutely, meaning they'll install a tower near your home and you will feel the symptoms of the radiation exposure. And this is already happening in many places in the world. Dr. Leonard Hardell in Sweden has published many cases of a tower being installed and people getting sick. And the only remedy that they have is that they have to distance themselves. They have to move. And have you heard of electromagnetic hypersensitivity?
I have heard of it. Yeah, I don't know that I've known anyone personally that has been afflicted with it as far as I know, but I've heard of it, yes.
So this is a small percentage of the population throughout the world that becomes intolerant to this radiation, in particular because the radiation is able to affect their nervous system. These people have to withdraw from society. They can hardly go shopping because there's Wi-Fi in the grocery store. And as you know, as a convenience, we want to have access to the internet everywhere, where to some people, this is intolerable. And these people are labeled as the canaries in the mine. They are warning us about the biological effect that to them is not only real, but it's immediate and it's intolerable. And they're warning us that there are more subtle effects that are happening to the rest of the population, which is blissfully unconscious, but will nonetheless be affected. And many of the diseases that we believe are actually inevitable. I mean, the rates of cancer, the rates of diabetes, the rates of Parkinson's, the rates of Alzheimer's disease that we have become accustomed to, in our opinion at ICB-EMF, are all influenced by this radiation.
Wow. I mean, that is really interesting. One of the people that I asked about this recently was Dr. Marty McCary, who's a physician that I have a lot of respect for. And I asked him his opinion about that. And he said that he thought that if there was some sort of a link between specifically cancers and the use of smartphones, that he thought that you would see more tumors on, say, the right side of people's bodies because more people happen to be right-handed and they handle the phones with their right hand. But according to him, we haven't seen that. That sort of made sense to me in a logical way. Why might that be a flawed way of thinking about this, Dr. Heroux?
Because he's wrong. In fact, there is more cancer on the ipsilateral side of tumors in people who use cell phones. But of course, you can always dispute the data. You can always lengthen the discussion. You can always make challenges to things that are fairly obvious in order to sell and to the next generation of cell phones. So make no mistake, when an industry has very, very large financial interests at stake, it will make every effort to make conclusions, very difficult to arrive at. Essentially, in science, it's difficult to obtain certainty, and industry knows that very, very well. So scientific discussions can be lengthened ad infinitum and ad nauseum if people are sufficiently motivated to do so. So your physician is wrong. In fact, there are more tumors in the ipsilateral side of brains. But you have to go to cancer registries that vary in quality. You have to have diagnoses. Do you have biopsies? It gets very, very complicated and very detailed. And there are plenty of people who are willing to be hired by industry to muddy the water, so to speak. And the people who have no interest, no financial interest, are being overwhelmed by the activity of by the propaganda of industry.
From what you can tell, is there any difference in the products produced by certain companies over others? Does any particular kind or brand of mobile phone produce more electromagnetic radiation than another brand?
Well, it's well known in the industry that Apple's the worst because you have a number of antennas, in each cell phone. You can have like 6, 7 antennas or more, the same way that you have many, many cameras in a cell phone. And the more you want to enhance capabilities, the more you want to provide features in your phone, the more you depend on radiated energy. And yes, the Apple phones are the worst. On the other hand, there are many other brands of phone that exceed even the legal limits of exposure. In the case of the cell phones, they are allowed to expose your brain to levels of radiation that are higher than what is permitted for your whole body, simply because you couldn't have a phone if you didn't have this special permission for brain exposure. And essentially, the leaders in providing features will always be the ones who require the most intense exposures. And you probably don't know that when you measure the transmission of energy into the brain, manufacturers are allowed to choose the distance at which the phone is placed from the head. Probably when you use a cell phone, you place it against your ear, touching your ear. But it is tested, actually, maybe up to a quarter of an inch away from your ear. So you think that the phone respects the specific absorption rate limits that are imposed on industry, but in fact, not only do they exceed it, but they are tested at distances that are entirely unrealistic. In other words, the cell phones have been tested in a very summary way, in a way that is entirely negligent from the point of view of safety, in order to achieve a very wide market for a device that is very, very practical. And the consequences of that is that your health will suffer for most people in the future, not now. So we are, I would say, very accepting of convenience as we are blind of the consequences of radiation.
Lastly, Dr. Heroux, and I hope you'll come back. I've learned a lot from this conversation. But in terms of what people can do individually, I understand your work from a public policy point of view, and God bless you, and I think that's wonderful. But if people want the convenience of having a smartphone, which is kind of a requirement in a lot of modern jobs these days, but they want to minimize their chances of getting sick, what advice would you give to them?
Well, in the present situation today, don't place a phone against your head. This is one of the first considerations. Also, don't live within 500 meters of a cell phone tower. But the deepest changes have to come from the engineering community. I mean, I know the engineering community, hearing what I say, will perceive me as an enemy. In fact, I am their friend. I want them to redesign the wireless system to increase its safety. It is entirely possible.
Wow. Well, Dr. Paul Heroux, I appreciate the conversation very much. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thanks for staying up late with us.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. If you want to comment on any portion of that rather thought-provoking conversation, you could certainly give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.